All right, hello and welcome to today's Democast. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Chris Shields. I head up product marketing at Gurucul, and I will be moderating today's live session. I'm joined by Graham Reed, one of our solutions architects with over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity industry, working with multiple SIEM, UEBA, and XDR vendors, as well as EDR and endpoint vendors. But before I jump in, a few housekeeping notes. You will usually receive this session within recording within 2 days. And if the resolution is bad, you should be able to change that. I think it defaults to 480p, but you can increase the resolution if needed. All right, SIEMs have gotten a bad rap with declining detections, skyrocketing costs, inadequate visibility, and control over your data, right? That's understandable. So here we try to flip those myths on their head. In this Democast, we'll bust the myth that SIEMs fail to deliver value. We'll cover how Gurucul REVEAL security analytics platform can help you reduce your costs while enhancing visibility and mitigating organizational risk. So before we jump in, just kind of wanted to cover kind of how it works, right? The Gurucul security analytics platform is completely modular and can solve many different use cases. Product capabilities are simply a matter of just flipping a switch for your licensing, and you never have to redeploy the platform or re-ingest data. Common product modules include things like SIEM, UEBA, SOAR, OpenXDR, NTA, Identity Access Analytics, just to name a few. So as I build this slide out, sources can be streamed by collecting data from agents running on host endpoints, centralized aggregators for on-premises, and certainly cloud environments that collect and forward that data, as well as scheduled collection from supported API endpoints, or even from low-cost cloud object stores with full replay capabilities. And so our data optimizer works in a linear flow across 4 core areas. First, collect the data, then you optimize the data, enhance that data, and then you route it where you need it to go. So think of data optimizer like this giant funnel that collects your data from any source in any format. And that data is then filtered, normalized, transformed, and enriched. And that can be for any security data, non-security data, and even IT ops data. And so this results in kind of 2 output streams, critical and non-critical data. So I'll cover the non-critical data first. And all that non-critical data and raw data is output or routed into like a low-cost storage of your choice. Can be data lake agnostic, can be our cloud, doesn't matter where it goes. You just know that you never lose any of your data. Then, if we talk about the critical data, that it's contextualized and it's contextualized and put into and prepared for analytics. So Reveal includes out-of-the-box pipelines to simplify your ingestion, and over 10,000 pieces of content like dashboards and widgets and saved queries and detection models and rules. I know I'm missing a few in there. So that really it's designed to deliver that value day one without a lot of heavy lifting. It then automates those detections in real time and provides risk prioritized case of evidence with full 360-degree context so that you can respond faster. Investigations are powered by our SME AI capability to really streamline those investigations and help you reduce the time it takes to respond. And then, of course, response can be automated with our tightly integrated SOAR module that I mentioned earlier. And then lastly, our universal federated search, where of course, you can search the data that goes into your data lake or our data lake, but also the key is that you can search any of that data regardless of its location, really to get full visibility and deeper investigative insights. All right, so that's just kind of a quick overview of how it works. Now I'm going to turn it over to Graham to kind of walk us through the demo.
Thank you, Chris. I will share my screen.
All right.
And we will get going. Okay.
Awesome.
Excellent. Okay, so before I actually dive into the demo, there's a couple of things I just wanted to add on to what Chris was saying. So Chris talked about being able to pull the data in and using our data optimizer. I will dive into that in a second, actually show you how we do that. But yes, the way the architecture works is that we can pull in from multiple different sources. Those sources can be on-prem, can be cloud. No matter where they reside, we can pull those in. The data optimizer will allow us to then start filtering out the stuff that we need and then sending the stuff that we do not need down to a low-cost storage, either stuff that we host or something that you host yourself. The other thing to pull in also is that when it comes to being able to pull in log sources, a lot of the vendors, SIEM vendors, UBA vendors will talk about being able to pull in from any data source. What they tend to mean is any security data source. Where we differentiate ourselves from that is that we can pull in from anything, and when we mean anything, we mean anything. Because when it comes to analytics, the context is incredibly important. So being able to pull in from non-necessary security data, maybe something like HR or financial information, we can pull that data in, and it will add more context as to when we do our analytics, as to the mindset of the person when we're starting to think about behavioral analytics. So we pull the data in here, and we can use our data optimizer, which I'll go into in a second, or we can pull in directly from there. Once it goes into the system, we will do our analytics, and then we'll start sending the data for storage to our own data lake, or we can also send that to a third party. So when it comes to adding value, a lot of the times people nowadays are starting to use something like a Snowflake or a Databricks, and there really is no point in being able to have is to store those logs in our data lake, and then maybe have a copy of those in a customer's on-prem, in their own Snowflake environment. So what we're able to do is actually choose to send data to use your own customer's Snowflake as their own data lake. So there's a single point of place where that data is stored. It helps reduce the cost because there's no storage from our side. The cost gets put down onto where your current Snowflake instance, where those costs are centralized. So that's an extra value that we can add there as well. So we're reducing the cost of storage because you already have that storage capabilities in your own environment. So when it comes to bringing data in, another value add that we will give is that we have the ability to pull in data from multiple different sources. A lot of SIEM vendors also will, if there's a log source that is not supported, will be a PS engagement. Within Gurucul, we don't believe that we should charge our customers to improve our own product. So therefore, as part of the partnership, we will build those integrations as part of the actual partnership. There's no extra cost for doing so. So when it comes to the actual platform itself, pulling the data in, historically, when people think about costs of SIEM, it comes down to ingestion costs. There are significantly more different thoughts around that as well. As far as when people think of SIEM, they think, okay, well, if I have a SIEM, I need to pull in that data. Maybe I need to start looking at a way of reducing the ingest by using a data filtering product. So that becomes one more product. Maybe they want to start add more analytics. So maybe they need to add a UBA. Maybe they want to do some case management or some SOAR actions. All these are extra add-ons that are sort of bolt-ons to different security products. Within the Gurucul platform, we include all of those different areas as one particular platform. It's a single data lake, multiple different entry points into that area. And as I go through that process, through the demo, I will sort of talk about the fact that we have different entry points in, but the data behind it is always the same stuff. So when it comes to addressing the first one, which is the big one that most people think about when they think of SIEM costs, is that ingestion cost. A lot of the times, historically, people have been told to send as much data as you can to the SIEM, and then we'll do the analytics afterwards. But when you start to think about that, you get yourself in a situation where if you're being charged by an ingestion model, well, I've got this particular limit on my license. I need to start prioritizing which values, which log sources I need to pull in to be able to meet me under that particular value, under that particular license. What that means is that you have to start deciding, okay, which log sources are more valuable to us. The more data you can get into the SIEM, the more analytics you can do. So what we want to try and do there is to help satisfy both of those by reducing the amount of data coming in, but still add in the value that you need to see the visibility of what you need to see. So in this case with Data Optimizer, what we're able to do is that we know what we need for our analytics to work. So what we can do is we can start to filter out the data that's not necessarily needed for those things and send that off. So you can see in this particular example, we're starting off with 8300 EPS. We're doing optimization, we're dropping that down to 3300. So straight away, you've got a reduction of 60% of noise. And what that allows you to do is either reduce the ingest cost, or what most approaches are is, well, I can now add in those extra log sources to give me that visibility that I really wanted in the first place. So this particular dashboard is able to show me where the majority of my noisy logs are. In this case, it happens to be the Windows logs. What I can do is I can go into the actual system here and I can see how I'm doing that. So in this case, I'm looking at this particular source. I'm reducing this particular source from 523 gig down to 209. And we're doing that purely by filtering out the data that we don't need. Now, in this case, we're sitting in front of a Splunk instance where we're able to pull out this particular logs and send the stuff that we need to Splunk. We can also have this fork off and then send it to an S3 storage, for example. So therefore, we're still keeping that, keeping those raw logs for compliance reasons, but we're not having to send a lot of that noise into the SIEM. Now, Chris mentioned federated search as in his first slide. What that allows us to do is if we send data to like an S3 bucket, for example, it's still searchable within the platform. You just have to tell it we'll search through our typical logs. And then if we don't see what we need to see, we'll start searching through those S3 buckets as well. So that's the way that we're able to add value from a ingestion perspective, reducing the noise and allowing us to pull in more data into the system. The next stage is when it comes to actually getting. Now we have that data into the system. How do we add more value from actually being able to show you what you need to see? A lot of the times, a lot of the costs come into sort of those hidden costs, really into time. How long does it take for an analyst to be able to find the stuff that's important to them? If it takes us 2 hours, we can reduce that significantly by showing it in more a risk prioritization. It helps the analysts because the first idea of an analyst really is to think, when I see an alert, do I need to escalate that alert, or do I need to exit out as a false positive or as a non-concern? I have a common approach when I say 1,000 alerts to an analyst is as useful as 0, because it just becomes overwhelming and there isn't enough time to look through those and prioritize. So within the Gurucul platform, what I'm able to do here is actually use risk-based prioritization to say, okay, well, I start to see alerts firing. I want to start to apply a risk score to each of those alerts, and then I can as that risk score starts to bubble up, I can see where I need to focus my attention. Now, in this case, in this example, I can see a number of other things. I'm able to see how many alerts are firing in the past 24 hours and how many of those have turned into cases. Within the platform, we have a full case management product as well, which sits inside, and you can see that here under the response tab. This allows me to see all of my different cases that have been opened up. Those cases can be opened automatically by the system. By default, we have a risk score of 84 and above. It will open up a case and starts pulling all of those alerts related to that case together. Or an analyst can open up a case themselves as well. So when I see that, I can say, okay, well, just by doing that, I'm able to reduce my amount of alerts from 263 alerts down into 51 cases. We will tie all alerts into either a user or an entity, so that way you always know that a particular alert, what that alert is associated with. Now, the next value is what we're able to do is to start to show you a contextual analysis of the data. So I can see I've tied these alerts into Ken. We're pulling all this data in from multiple different sources and presenting it in an easy way to see. I can see I'm comparing Ken's behavior to himself. I'm also able, by pulling data in from my HR systems and from Active Directory, I'm able to start to compare Ken to his peer groups. Like is Ken's activity, for example, changing compared to everybody else in the same group. This happens to be the countries, or how does his activity compare to his peer groups? In this case, one who shares the same manager. So being able to pull that data in, show that against other users or other devices, enables me to understand exactly what it is that's happening in this scenario. I close this. The other thing I'm able to start to see is that risk score over time. So do I need to focus my time on Ken? Why has his risk changed? So being able to add more value by just presenting the information that's important. I don't need to see every single activity that Ken has ever produced. I want to see what Ken has been doing that has raised these alerts. So by hovering over these areas, I'm able to see that. I'm able to see what he is doing. I can dive into that more information. The system is then also going to present the analysts with a way of being able to see when these alerts are fired related to the time. So in this case, I'm looking between the 8th and the 15th. I want to dive that back a little bit and dive into here, and I can see that risk score has changed again. So where do I need to focus my time? Maybe I need to see the initial attempt, the initial thing that's caused this alert to spike up. And because of the way that we show this data in a timeline view, you're able to see straight away that this is where the risks started. Now, by tying this data into non-necessarily security-related systems, I'm able to see that happens to be Ken got a disciplinary report for work habits. So now going back to what I said earlier about context, I'm now able to see, okay, well, the context in which things are happening, I know that he has been given a bad performance review. I can start to see different activities happening, maybe stuff around job search websites, for example. I'm starting to see all these things happening. But as you can see on the left-hand side, the data is appearing, but the risk score is going up slowly, because just because you got a bad performance review doesn't mean that you're going to be a risk to the business. But the risk, it's worth knowing that that's happening because of the context. So as I start to move up, I can see all of these things happening. I can see all these starting to access customer information. We're pulling that in based around a behavioral-based model, understanding baselining and being able to only produce alerts when things spike outside of the norm for a particular user. This is where the value of behavioral analytics is much more useful over those traditional correlation rules of the older SIEM-based approaches of just saying, if I see a certain thing happen, alert me. I want to know what is the normal for that user, because if I just went from an alert that said, if I see if we talk about pages printed, for example, maybe if I see someone's printed off more than 10 pages in a day, I want to be alerted. Well, more than 10 pages in a day could be standard for somebody. So what happens then? We get lots of alerts which are false positives, or I start adding in some exceptions, and if I add exceptions, I could potentially miss something. So being able to start to use these behavioral-based approaches, I can start to learn the normal and then start to alert to those abnormalities. And those abnormalities can be specific to a particular user or a particular entity. As I start to look through all these different things, I can see other things happening, but at no point yet am I having to dive into those raw logs. We have all those raw logs behind, but to help the analysts understand what's going on, they want to see the stuff that's important, and then they can start diving into that data. And the way that I do that is a number of ways. I can click on investigate here, and it will take me into the raw logs. I can also click on respond here, and it will allow me to add more value by able to have a two-way communication between the analysts as well as to the administrators of the product. What I mean by that is that maybe I see something happening. I close this as risk managed. Maybe I see a location anomaly. I could add a thing here that says let's close this as risk managed for next week, because I know this person's on vacation. If I go back, it helps reduce the noise that's potentially coming up by somebody traveling and it flying up on there. Other thing I can also do is provide feedback to the admins and say, okay, well, I'm seeing this alert firing. I'm able to then say, well, I think this model needs to be tuned because X, Y, Z. I'm able to add that value to help reduce that, to reduce the data that's coming in. And maybe they have the analysts, the admins, be able to tweak that rule to make it more specific to what needs to happen. And one of the other things that we're able to do, and I'll dive in a second, is be able to actually take that model, and rather than just say this is the model and that's what you have, as an admin of the system, I'm able to start to take that model and start tweaking that model and make it exactly how I want it to work for my particular environment. If I want to see that data, I can click on Investigate, and it will now take me into the Investigation tab. I don't need to be able to have to learn to write these queries, because the system is going to pre-populate that query for me so that I don't need to start writing that. Now, once I'm in there, I'm now only focused on the data that I'm concerned about. So now I can start looking through this and say, okay, well, is there any information in here that I want to start diving into? Maybe I want to look at the recipient. I click on that. I can either add that to the search, which will just build the search for me, or I can click on Add to Attributes. Again, what this is allowing me to do is able to me to start to look through those messages, but not necessarily have to dive into that raw message. I can start to see, okay, how many explicit, unique versions of the recipient is there? It's just the one. So I know that that's the only person who's being sent to. If I go into add here, maybe I want to add this into the search. As I do that, it builds that search for me, and I can then see just the results of those searches. The other thing I'm also able to do is, rather than just looking through those queries, those activities, which is just every single message, I can also start to look at the anomalies themselves. So just looking specifically at anomalies. So again, different entry points into the system. I can also see which users are also are triggering the most amount of data, the most amount of alerts. Again, going back to the same, just a different entry point in. So adding it depending on how my analysts want to dive into that data and do that. I can also maybe particularly take a approach of making a SOAR action. So maybe I'm seeing that Alicia is doing something she shouldn't be doing. If I do my investigations into her there, I can see what she's been up to. But I maybe want to go back into here and actually take an action. And this time I want to take an action to execute a playbook. So from the single location, without having to dive off going into my Azure AD, this sample, I can just go into here, and I can take an action to disable this user. Take an action, execute that, and from the single platform, I can hit that execute, and it's going to disable that user. Now, that's the manual way of doing it. Other ways we can also do it is by looking at the case management, maybe going into my playbooks. We have a lot of playbooks already built out of the box that allows us to add that value straight away. If there's playbook, maybe there's a playbook that you want to build specifically for yourself, you're able to build the system inside of here to say, okay, well, I want to have a trigger. What's my trigger point? Trigger point is a model is being executed. What I want to do now is take an action. So if that action happens, make a decision tree to say, okay, if this happens, and maybe if this, for example, maybe I want to disable a user. Maybe I want to have say, well, if between off hours, disable that user automatically. If it's during work hours, I want to trigger an email to be sent to my analyst to say, this is something that we need to take an action on this particular person. So having that SOAR capabilities built into the platform reduces the need for a third-party SOAR. If you currently have a case management tool or a third-party SOAR that you would like to use with Gurucul platform, we offer full API access as well. So you are able to trigger, rather than trigger an action from ourselves, we can take an action through a third-party SOAR product. Now, the final thing I want to just quickly touch on when it comes to the adding the value is we can start to make the models and the alerts only focus on things that specifically matter. We can start to add a lot less noise, and therefore adding a lot more value. So in this case, we're able to start to look at multiple different models and start chaining those models together. So if we start to see multiple models firing, we know that if that particular scenario happened, it's very, very important. We want to bubble that up to the top. So combining these model chaining with risk-based prioritization allows you to see those important actions happening straight away. Similarly with this one, we can also look at this particular model here, which is about a sort of behavioral analytics. We can say, okay, well, let's look at this one. This is a behavioral analytics looking at data exfiltration. The way that we're doing that is by baselining over a certain amount of days. Again, this can be tweaked as well, and only show me stuff once I start to see an outlier of 2% difference. I can also then turn around and add a little bit more specific and say, I only want this model to happen when it meets these criteria. So again, being very, very specific as to when particular models are firing to allow us to see that data only popping up at the highest prioritization when it needs to. So I'm conscious that we're coming up to the amount of time that we requested, so I'm going to hand it back to Chris. But yeah, just to summarize, multiple different ways that the system can add value by reducing the amount of separate products that are needed, reducing the amount of data that gets brought into the system, and by using the studio and using the models, we're able to prioritize the alerts that are coming out, so the analysts spend less time looking at logs and more time at looking at those alerts.
Excellent. Thank you, Graham, for a great demo. Be sure to check our website for upcoming Democast topics. We're doing these every 2 weeks on a different topic. There also is an opportunity for you guys to suggest topics that you would like to see on that same page. So be sure to go there and let us know what you'd like to see. Thank you, everybody, for attending today's Democast. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you.